My name is Rosenwald. I was born May 18, 1924, in a town which is named Piotrków Trybunalski in Poland. It's about 49 kilometers from Lodz. And I was brought up in a family of 3 brothers and 1 sister. I'm the youngest of the brothers. We lived in an area which was mostly Christian, was 100% Christian. Within 3 or 4 blocks, we were the only Jews. And my father had a grocery store, and we lived a comfortable life. We attended private schools, religious schools, all of us. In other words, that means that we were able to support, my parents were able to support the expense of private schools. Of course, like I said, I was brought up in a religious way of life, and when the war broke out, of course, all this terminated, and we were forced to move from that area into the large ghetto, which the Germans called it, closed it off at that time, and it consisted of approximately 20 to 30 blocks, square blocks of the downtown area, which was called the Ghetto, and we were not permitted to leave that area, only under guard, within groups, to work, and from work back to the Ghetto. We used to work and used to be working every day for the Germans. They forced us to work different places, and they took us out in groups up to a certain point where close to well, I'm jumping ahead of myself, I guess. Well, anyway, probably will be the same. And before 1942 or late 1941, they put me in a permanent place to work, which was called Hutakara, which was manufacturing plate glass. And we were still were going in groups to work from the Ghetto to the place of work, and from the place of work to the Ghetto, to stay there overnight, and then the next day doing the same thing, up to a certain point in 1942, where they took most of the people out of the Ghetto, which consisted of, at that time, between 22 and 24,000 people. And they kept us in place of work for the duration of the expulsion of all the Jews from the large Ghetto. When they were finished with that, which was about 7 to 12 days later, they brought us back into a smaller ghetto, which consisted of about 6 to 8 square blocks, and they put us in houses or vacant houses to stay there, and to go to work, back and forth to work under guard again every day. Now, when I came back to the smaller ghetto, I left out part of the story. My father also used to work in certain different places every day, till finally in late 1941 they put him in a permanent place, which is the same place I was working in, the Hutakara, and he was working there too. And but one day they took him to clean the channels, the gas channels, which was feeding the big ovens for the glass factory, and to clean out those channels, he stepped into hot ashes and he burned his legs. That means he was disabled, he couldn't work anymore. He was of no use to the Germans and to the people which were running that factory. So he stayed home till that action came to take out all these people from the big ghetto to Treblinka, to the gas chambers, of course, which we found out later about it. And when I came back to the smaller ghetto, I didn't even know about it. and neither did my brothers knew about it. My parents planned and executed a plan which they made themselves a hiding place within the building on the attic. They boarded off a certain corner of the attic, and it looked like it's part of the building, a normal part of the building, but it had a secret entrance, and they stacked some food and some water there. When I came back to the smaller ghetto, which was after they took out all the people from the big ghetto, my older brother, which happened to work at a different working place at a factory of tables and closets for the German army, which was called Bugai. Now, he told me that he found out that the parents are hiding in the building. After a few days, we got worried because, of course, their idea of hiding was that probably that whole thing wouldn't last too long, maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks, and they could survive there and then leave, of course, the secret place and mingle with the rest of the people. But, of course, we knew it's not going to, it's going to take for many, many months and maybe years. We didn't know how long, and we were started to worry about them. So we were planning and started to plan how to get to the parents. And it happened so that the parents, the building we were living in, the bigger ghetto, was in a square which was called Platz Trybunalski. There was a big square, and one side of the square was the German command. Now, the next side of the square was the building where we lived before they took out all these people from the big ghetto. And they were hiding right next door to the Germans on top in the attic. So there was a question who should go and how to get there. So finally I came up with the idea, I'm going to go. First of all, I was the youngest one. Second of all, I was maybe more brave than the others. And I didn't think about the risk involved. So the only way to go was every day when we were passing that place, we were passing right in front of the house where we used to live, which turns us into the next place, which is the command. And we were counted on the way out and on the way in. Like if there's a group walking out of 40 people, they were counted 40. Next group came in 40 people, they counted 40 in. So I told my brothers, I said, the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to go with the group, I'm going to be the last one in the group, or one before last, and as we pass the building, I'll just jump out from the group, jump into the building, and whatever I feel I should take him along, I'll have with me, and this is the way I'm going to get in touch with my parents. They described me exactly the place they were hiding. And that's what I did. In the evening, I used to work on 3 different shifts, every day, every week a different shift, like from 6 to 2, 2 to, let's see, 2, 4, 8, 2 to 10, I think, and 10 to 6, 3 8-hour shifts. Now, every week we changed our shift to a different shift, and that was the night shift. In other words, I was going so-called to the night shift, or instead of going to work, I just jumped out of my group and got into the building. And I was waiting for the next group, which was returning from work. And as the group returned, passing by that building again, I jumped out and joined the group, and hoping and praying that the guard, which was guarding that group, wouldn't see me. There was only one guard. And that's what happened. On my first trip, what I did, I took along some bread, some onions, some sugar, dry stuff for them, which we thought maybe they can use it without cooking. They couldn't cook anything because that would arouse suspicion, seeing smoke coming out of the building or whatever. Anyway, that's what I did on my first trip. Now, since the first trip was successful, I said, well, the next trip I'm going to start bringing him in. So the first one, on my first trip, when I met my parents in that secret place, they decided that the first one to go in would be my sister, which was the youngest one. She was 3 years younger than I was. And I took along a boy's hat and a boy's jacket, extra one, and when I got up there, I dressed her up as a little boy, and we came down, waited at the door, seeing the group coming, approaching, and then we jumped in, and everything was successful. I brought her into the small ghetto, and she was in the small ghetto. But this didn't help much, because a few days later, there were a lot of people like my parents, which were in secret places. They were hiding, and then they were joining the ghetto. So instead of the ghetto being consisting of 1,200 people, it was about 1,800 people, because people started to come out from the hiding places and joining up with the people in the ghetto. And so they started to search for these people, and they found my sister. Of course, again, as we were at work, they were going from house or from room to room in the small ghetto, and they were starting searching for those illegal, they called it, people, and they found my sister, and they took her out, and they still put together a big group of people, and they took her to the next town, which was being cleaned out, and that was Tomaszów Mazowiecki. It was about 25 kilometers from us. Also a bigger town, the size of Piotrków Trybunalski. And they joined her up there. Matter of fact, when she was passing a small town by the name of Wolbusz, which is in between Piotrków and Tomaszów, my grandparents used to live there. So after the war, people were telling us that they saw my little sister, her name was Sapcha, and they called her, Sapcha, leave the group or disappear, we'll hide you out. But she wouldn't do it. She was a little girl. She didn't understand that much. And she was afraid she might be turned over to the Germans anyway, and they will shot her on the spot. So she went with the group, and we found out, of course, the group was joined up in Tomaszów Mazowiecki with the bigger groups, and they shipped her out to Treblinka. That was the end of my sister. Then there was, as the Germans were searching for the secret places, because they found out that there's a lot of secret places, they used the Jewish police, or so-called police, which they took about a number of people, and they gave them hats and armbands, and they made them as police, the Jewish police from the ghetto. And there was one particular Jewish policeman. His name was Yoina Levin, and he was working with the German Gestapo by the name of Willy. He had a vicious dog. As a matter of fact, I have to come back to that dog story, because there was still, it's in the back of my mind. And he was going around in buildings and attics and cellars and saying, in Jewish, people, are there any people here in Jewish? And if they are here, now's the time to get out, and because that's the best time. In the meantime, Willy was waiting right next door to him, and the reason for him going with Willy was when they took out those people, of course, everybody had a little jewelry or valuable things with him. So, of course, they took away all these things, and then they put all these people in our big synagogue in town. So one day, after I took out my sister from the hiding place, that happened to them. That Willy and Yoina Levin came up to the attic and started talking. He in Jewish. He said, Jews, if anybody's here, now it's the best time to get out. Of course, the Jews had heard some Jewish language, so they answered from the back of the other wall. And, of course, the minute they answered, they knocked out the wall or knocked out the opening. They found where the opening is, and they took him all out. Of course, they took away their valuables from them and put them in the big synagogue. So as they put him in the synagogue, there was again a question how to get him out from there. So at first, we found out that they're surrounded by the Ukrainians guards. They had those Russians which were working together with the Germans, and they were guarding him. So again, there's a question, who should go and maybe try to find a way to get him out? Now, I was, like I said, I was a lot younger, and I was the youngest one of the brothers, and I said, I'll go. We found out that people sneaking out of the temple, hiding in the houses, the empty houses from the old ghetto around there, and waiting for an occasion or for a way to get into the smaller ghetto. So one night, we found out that my parents sneaked out from the big temple, and they're hiding in one of those houses. So I decided I'm going, and I took another buddy of mine, and he had his sister. Matter of fact, his sister still lives in Israel. And he had a sister which sneaked out with my parents together, and we said we're going to search for them. As we approached the area from the temple, that was in the middle of the night, pitch dark, we couldn't use any flashlight, just find our way through in the darkness. We stumbled on people over people, which were sneaking out from the temple. And we couldn't find our parents and not his sister. So we started to go back to the small ghetto. As we came, the way we got out from the small ghetto was through a water channel, under a bridge. Through a water channel. We jumped in on the way back close to the ghetto already, into that water channel. And as we got onto the bridge, there's a group of people laying there. As we get close, it's my parents and his sister. And they were, of course, they didn't know who was coming. It was dark, and then we found out it's them, and we took him into the ghetto. And my parents were in the ghetto, of course. My father couldn't work because of his injuries. My mother, they put her to work in the kitchen because they used to cook the soups for all the people there, general kitchen for all the people there, and we used to dispense soup and food every day. When after we got home from work, we had to stand in line and wait for our little soup or our little food. Up to a certain point, and so again, but they were illegal. My mother was still illegal because she wasn't from the original people in the ghetto, so she wasn't considered a legal employed. She was just temporarily employed, and any day they could take him out and move him out from the ghetto and move him, we didn't know at that time, but probably move him either to another ghetto or to another place where they moving the people out from the ghettos. So anyway, when we were leaving for work, again, my father and mother, they made themselves hiding places. My mother was under the bed with logs of wood in front of her if she wasn't working. And my father had made himself a little place in the attic just to lay there till we get home. And when we got home, there was nothing happened. But when we were gone, the Jewish police and the German were searching the places again.
You were with your brothers?
My other brother was working with me, and the oldest brother was working in that factory from tables and cabinets. Cabinet making. That's the word I was searching for before. And anyway, one day when I came home from work, I found that they took my father away. They were searching the apartment, the rooms. My mother was hiding under the bed with the logs in front of it. They didn't move the bed. But my father was in the attic, and they searched the attic, and they found him. They took him down again to the big temple, the big synagogue in our city. And they put together a little over 500 people in the temple. Of course, the next town, Tomashev, where my sister went after they found her, was cleared out already. There was no Jews at all. There was no small ghetto, no place to work there. Our town, like I said, there was about 1,200 people left because we were working in 3 factories. So they put my father into the big synagogue, and 3 days later, a matter of fact, my present wife, she was then a little girl, she was in that synagogue too. She was also one of the illegals because she came in from outside. From the Polish side. She was hiding for a few days, and then she was afraid or got tired of it, and she joined in it together, and they found her and they put her to the synagogue too. And as she was there, the last night before they were thinking of some cleaning out that synagogue, her mother somehow got some influence on the president of the ghetto, the Jewish president of the ghetto, or maybe she paid him some money, I don't know. We still don't know till this date. And that last night, they came into the temple and they called her name, and so she was sure that if they called her name, that she's going to be shot, because if Gestapo comes and they call your name, that means you're being shot. But it happens to be the opposite. They called her name and brought her into the ghetto. So she survived. Of course, I married her after the war. And my father and over 500 people were in the temple, and the next day they dug some holes in a little forest there. It's called Rakuf. It's near town, about a mile and a half from town. And they took the 500 people out, and they shot them on the spot with machine guns. As a matter of fact, one of them, after he was shot or fell in between the dead people, dug himself out that same night. And he went, of course they were all naked, and he went to some neighbors around the forest to get some clothes, and they turned him over to the Germans, and he was shot again. And
did you know about it right then?
Because the Poles told the story. They told exactly the name of the guy, what he looked like. The Poles, which had, of course, we knew all. I mean, I knew a certain number of Poles. Other people knew a different number of Poles. So we were told those stories because at work, where we were working working together with Polacks at the place of work.
You know that your father was shot?
Well, yeah, we knew the following day that they were shot in Rakov because we were told about, again, through the Polacks. They brought in those stories because they've seen those things. And if I had somebody who saw these things, where I was working, or he heard it from a friend of his, when he came to work, he told me. And the stories carried from one to another. And after the war, actually, we went there and we took all these remains of the 500 bodies into the Jewish cemetery. And that was the story and till the beginning of 42. Then after a little while, I think it was in the middle of 43 or the beginning of 43, they took us out from the small ghetto, and they put us, all the people, if we worked at the Huta, we were stationed in a certain block or in certain buildings right near the place of work, near the Huta. And my brother, the oldest, I was with my brother. My older brother, which worked in Bugai, was again stationed right near that place of work in Bugai. As a matter of fact, they were stationed in the factory itself. They had some buildings there, so they emptied it, and they kept those close to 600 or over 600 people there. Now, our place was the Huta Kara and the Huta Hortensia, which is two factories, glass factories, one of plate glass, another one of small glass, like glasses and stuff like that. And both those factories belonged to the same company, and they kept us all in the same buildings. It's about, I would say, our place was about 500 yards from the factory, and the other people which walked to work was maybe 1,000 yards from the factory. And so we worked, let's see, I worked 8 hours because, like I said before, I worked 3 different shifts. So the 24 hours consist of 3. But other people which worked manual labor, there was no limit in hours. In other words, they know they're going 8 o'clock to work, but they could stay till 6, till 7, till 8. Whenever the work for that day was finished, they went home. At least with me, I knew 2 o'clock, I'm leaving. I'm going so-called home, or the place where we were sleeping. And that was till, that was from the beginning, if I'm not mistaken, the beginning of 1943, till around September 44. Now, September 44, we were all evacuated to Częstochowa. some of them remained in Częstochowa, which is another town about 60 kilometers from Piotrków south. I was placed in a company or a place of work which is called Hasak, and they were manufacturing shells for bullets. It was an army manufacturing place. Now a lot of people, like my older brother, he was shipped out. A matter of fact, he was shipped out just before the Russians came in, because as soon as the Russians got closer, they started to ship out. Now myself, they didn't get to me yet, but as far as him, because my older brother, me and my middle brother stayed there. My older brother, he was just shipped out one day. The Russians were already almost in the city. He was shipped out to the last transport from Częstochowa. So anyway, on January, I think it's either 11 or 14, I think it was 14, 1945, right. January 14, 1945, the Russians came in. We got liberated. As we got liberated, everybody took off, of course, and tried to look for home, or maybe you'll find something. We walked those 60 kilometers to Piotrków, came into town, and found my mother there. She was hiding out the last few months. She got out from the place where she worked. She was hiding at a former customer of ours from our grocery store. And of course she paid them well for it. As a matter of fact, those people are not living anymore, but their adopted son, they didn't have any kids. Their adopted son, we're still writing letters, and I'm sending them packages, and I'm sending them money whenever I can. And so I found my mother there, and of course the first thing when I came to town, where do you go? To the place where maybe you'll find somebody. Or we go there to the what's called the main street in town. We go there, and people recognize me that I'm Jewish, and the first word came on their mind, "You still alive?" In other words, they weren't happy to see me alive, but they were just wondering if any Jews are left over, because with all this happening, they knew, the Polacks knew what was happening to us. And the way, on the looks of it, it looked like they were very upset about it, that we are still alive. But anyway, we made it our own. I found my mother, which came out of hiding, and we joined together, and we took up an empty apartment from the Germans which fled, or Volksdeutsche which fled, and then they started to put together like a little Jewish community center where all the information will come in, all the information will go out. And my mother started to be a little active in that community center.
This was in your hometown?
In my hometown, in Piotrków.
And were there many Jews?
Well, not too many. There was just a couple dozen, 3 dozen of Jews that came back. There were more than 3 dozen left from our town, but they never came back because they were in Germany. But as the Jewish start to approach our town, and so the first thing they go to the former Jewish community center, and that's what my mother and a few other people did. They went there, and they were waiting for people. What's your name, and where you come from? And we saw maybe your sister, maybe your cousin, or maybe somebody else, and that's how the word spread around. And then communication started coming in from other towns, which opened up as soon as the Russians went farther and farther, chased the Germans out. Matter of fact, the next town which opened up was Lodz. Now, Lodz had a big community, and they were well established already. I mean, they were right away got into big things where they had some posters on the wall of names which passed by from Russia. People came back, and this is how we found out if anybody's alive. Now, my wife, which at that time was a young little girl, and I was, of course, young and unmarried too, and As she came back, she did the same thing. She went to her grandparents or to her parents' former house to see if anybody's alive. Well, of course, she didn't find anybody, but what happened there, her grandparents used to be very well-to-do, and they had a nice home. It's like a little palace, and she went there, but the Polacks around there hated to see her come back and take up the place again. So one night they were sitting, and there were a few other people there. They were sitting in the kitchen and talking, and all of a sudden a few bullets came through the windows. Polacks started shooting in. They were trying to kill him. As she saw that, so the next day she came out, and she came to the place where my mother started a Jewish community center, so-called, and she told her story. So my mother told her, look, you're not going to go there anymore. You come with me. And we lived closer by in town. We just lived in an apartment. And that's how I met my wife, and that's how we got married. And then we found out that her mother might be alive in Bergen-Belsen. So she said she is going to Bergen-Belsen to look for her mother. And I said, no, you're not going. Your alone is not going. And you're not going by yourself. If you're going to go, I'll go with you. And we picked ourselves up. Matter of fact, my mother still stayed in the same town. We picked ourselves up, and we went. We went all the way through Berlin to Bergen-Belsen. I mean, we had to cross borders, of course.
This was after the war
That was
ended.
after the war. That was already, I'm talking now, I think I'm jumping ahead of my time. This was after May 48, which is after the war. As a matter of fact, it was September, or October, June, it was about July. And we started to travel. It takes time. Of course, you didn't fly, you didn't ride trains. You just either walked or hitchhiked, or till we got there. It took us probably quite a few weeks. But anyway, we came there, and she found her mother and her sister. As a matter of fact, when she told her mother that she is just coming from our hometown, her mother said, well, look, I know I have to go back there too. Not that to settle back there, but because all our valuables are hidden in the place of our grandparents there. And we're going to go back. I know exactly where it is. It's all in my mind. I don't have any plans. And she said, I'm going, and you're going to take me. If you're not going to take me, I'm going to go myself. So, of course, I said, okay, we're going back. We went back, and as we came back, the first thing we did, she told us where it is, and me and my present wife, or at that time, her daughter, went there and started to dig. We couldn't find nothing. But then she slept overnight, and she said, you know, I know exactly what it is. Let's go. In the morning, she went in, I took out the first spade of dirt, and there it is, whatever she was looking for. Not all of it, but some of it, whatever she was looking. And of course, we were afraid that the Polacks might know that we found some valuable things. They might kill us and take it away. So we just took off and left town again. We went back to Bergen-Belsen, where she had already an apartment. That was an former officers' camp, which was under UNESCO supervision, and we stayed there till 1951. My mother-in-law, we got married. Me and my wife got married there, and my mother-in-law left in 1948 for Israel. We still stayed there because we put our application for the United States, and we came here. We left there in 1951, and we came to the States in 1951. Now, going back, or should I go back? Now, I was talking about that Willie, and the reason I'm going back, I want to just to remind myself, or to leave the story about it, that up to date, up to this day, I still have a very bad feeling, not a bad feeling, but I still have where sometimes if I think about it or talk about it, Willie and his dog, and his German Shepherd dog, at nighttime I dream about it and I start screaming. And in the morning my wife tells me that of course she wakes me up, and then in the morning she asks me, how come you scream? And I always tell her the story about the Willie, that I see Willie and his dog, and as a young boy, I was afraid of dogs, and of course, seeing the things which Willie did with his German Shepherd dog, I was just
Willie was a German officer?
He was a German officer in the Gestapo. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
I guess what occurs to me is that, to ask you how you feel about telling your story here, where you know that it's going to give you a reaction, maybe even tonight.
Well, right now I'm a little warm about it. I'm heated up, or I feel that I'm getting a little excited. I never tell this story to anybody. I never talk to anybody, and just not at length anyway. But I talk once in a while about it. But if I come to talk about it at length, I really get excited about it, and I'll probably see Willie tonight. Mm-hmm. I'm sure I will, with his dog. I was called by the German consulate to testify against Willie. I mean, they called me if I want to testify. Of course, I said, of course, anytime. Stories which I know about him. And but they never called me back. I guess they had some people which knew him closer than I did. I was just a young kid, and I knew the stories were told about him. I knew, as a matter of fact, there was one time when they emptied the big ghetto into the smaller ghetto. And so afterwards, of course, people left everything, all their furniture, all their belongings, all they could take along, even to Treblinka was only whatever they could carry in their hands. So afterwards, what the Gestapo did, they cleaned all these houses, and they put furniture to furniture in the big warehouses, whatever they could, and sorting it out, and then to be shipped to Germany or maybe to other countries. Nobody knows. But anyway, so they took people from the ghetto to clean those places out. And, excuse me, I have to take some water. And one time, they took a friend of mine, and as he was cleaning out certain apartments, he came through a pair of socks, a brand new pair of socks. He took it in his pocket, and evidently that Willie was there guarding them, and he saw what he did. All he did, he just approached him, took out the pistol, shot him right on sight. That was the story which I know about it. And that boy was killed right away.
That was your friend?
It was a friend of mine, yes. And just because he stuck a pair of socks in his pocket, that was. There was many more stories about him, but of course some of them are forgotten. Some of them, I didn't see him, but I knew about a lot of stories. And as time goes by, of course now it's 38 years. Something like that. Stories get lost, and you forget about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. You were a young boy, and you were working with a more mature man. Did you feel up to it? Were you strong?
Oh yeah, I think I probably was stronger than all of them. Although I'm not built big, or I'm not a muscle man, but we were doing hard work. Just a matter of fact, my brother, which was only 2 years older than I was, which was working in the same factory as I did. Now, I was feeding, my work at the place in that factory, in that glass factory, was to feed those big ovens. We fed some coals in there. When we kept the gases going to the ovens, which were lit up at the oven side, and they're melting the glass at about 1600 Fahrenheit heat in the ovens. That's why I was working 8 hours. Now, my brother also was working 8-hour shift. Now, his specialty was he was feeding that oven with the raw materials, which consist of sand, old glass, and chemicals. And he was smaller, although I'm not big, but he was even smaller and more feeble than I was, and he was wheeling those wheelbarrows to the ovens. It was just a pity to look at him, the way he looked, and he did hard labor. It's just imaginable for a human being to do that kind of a work. It was really hard work. I think it was the place where they were mixing those chemicals and raw materials was about 200 yards away from the oven. And they were mixing it, and then they took in the wheelbarrows and had to wheel it from about 200 yards from the ovens into the oven, which was, they had to go up on a ramp, and that wheelbarrow of materials probably weighed about 300 pounds, at least 300 pounds, because it was sand and all kind of chemicals. And I think every half hour they had to, every one of them had to go 3 trips like that, plus mixing the materials. And those materials, they were wearing handkerchief on their noses because it was so strong, the odor from it's some kind of a sodium in there to melt up those materials. And it was just a pity it looked so. That's why I say I was young, but I was strong. And I didn't mind work as long as I could get something to eat. Work was nothing to us. I guess anybody, work was nothing, really. As long as we were fed or had enough to eat, work didn't mean nothing.
What was your most disturbing thoughts or feelings at that time? What were you most
Well, I was worried about the rest of my family. I was worried about my parents. I knew my father was shot. I knew my mother was working in a different place, and I was just, my biggest worry was when will this end? What was going to be the next day? As a matter of fact, there was no next day. We were just living from day to day, because it happens to me, actually. I usually love to sleep a lot, even those days and even today. So at that time, when, like I said before, our factory was about 500 yards from the place where we were staying. And in the morning, when they were trying to wake us up to work, we didn't have an alarm clock, so they were ringing the bell. And the first ring was meant to get ready. 5 minutes later, there was another bell, which means we all had to be in line in the group right at the gate to walk out and to walk under guard to the factory. And I usually used to get up at the second gong. Instead of going to the first gong ready, I was just grab my pants and ran. And I used to catch the group as they were leaving the gate. So one day that we had the Werkschutz leiter, which was the commander of the Werkschutz, of these people guarding us, and normally he wasn't there in the morning, not that early in the morning. I was leaving about 5 to 6, and but that morning he was there, and as usual I was late. And as they were closing the door, closing the gate, I still managed to squeeze through and trying to catch up with the group. Now, he saw that, and as he saw that, he started for me to stop. But I didn't want to stop. I knew it. I'm going to be rewarded for not being in time. So I kept running. So he pulled out his pistol and started shooting at me. I didn't look, and I didn't see if he was shooting to hit me or he was shooting in the air. But he fired 3 shots at me, and he sent out another guard to get me back. And of course, he didn't hit me, but the guard caught up with me, and he brought me back. And as he brought me back, he put me over a chair and told the guard to hit me a few times. Of course, I screamed more than I heard, but that was the reward for it. So that's why I said there was no tomorrow. You just prayed for today. You just lived with day to day. You just prayed that maybe the next days the Russian will come in, liberate them, because they were the closest one to us. Because we heard story, as a matter of fact, we heard stories that they're already approaching Warsaw, which is the biggest city in Poland, and all of a sudden they stopped, and everybody was getting already anxious that they'll be here tomorrow. But that tomorrow took another probably 5 months. In June, I think, May or June, till they came in January. And like I said, they came in January 14, and we got liberated then. So.
You said you just prayed. Did you mean literally you prayed, or did
well,
you pray?
With it in our mind. No, I didn't pray then anymore. No, I didn't. Although I observed the Jewish tradition at that time, like let's say Yom Kippur. I never missed not to fast, even in camp. But as far as praying, I mean, up to the date where we got into camp, actually where we got out of this big ghetto, and then afterwards the small ghetto, into the place of work right next to the factory, I prayed every day. Every day in the morning, I took my tefillin, and in the evening, of course, my mincha maref, you know. And but afterwards, when I saw what I mean, when I knew what happened, when I cleared my mind, and nobody was there to answer my question, how come my father was such a religious man, he was such a good man, and so I just fell back from my beliefs. I mean, I still believe in a higher authority, but I don't believe in doing the things I used to do when I was a little kid or when I was a young man. And I got away from a religious way of life. I'm just a traditional Jew, observing Jewish holidays, and brought up my kids in Jewish schools, private schools, even here, which cost us a lot of money. And so does my daughter. She brings up her kids in a traditional Jewish environment with Jewish education and Jewish schools. But I leave it up to the kids like I did to myself. Whatever they decide to do afterwards, I'm not going to tell them, not trying even to persuade them or tell them my feelings are the way they should do, because everybody's growing up. It's a normal situation today, and you just do whatever you feel like doing.
What happened to your brothers?
My brother, the middle brother, which worked with me, got liberated too at the same time from Gestapo. Now when we came back to town, he was already 21 at that time. So there was the Polacks, when the Russians liberated us. Of course, we were under Polish rule or under Russian together with the Polacks. They started to pull in young people into the army. And since he was 21, he was afraid he might be pulled in to serve in the Polish army. So he took off. He took off and went on the way to Israel. So he got as far as Italy. And in Italy, he was bathing there one day in 1946. And as he was swimming, he got a cramp and he drowned. Mm-hmm. And he was buried in Milano. Of course, we took him later on to Israel. He's buried now in Harazaisim in Jerusalem, together now with my mother and my older brother. Now, my older brother, like I said, he was shipped out the last day before the Russians came in from Gestapo. And he went through all different kind of terrible camps. And when the Americans came in, he was liberated in Bavaria. When the Americans came in, they found him on the road. He was almost out completely because he had some kind of a sickness at that time, probably undernourishment or whatever, from marching and so on. And he was taken into a hospital, normal hospital first, and then they found out that he acquired TB, and he was gouting, which is a big, used to be an officers' hospital in Germany, in South Bayern, for TB sick people. And he was there for about 3 years, till 1948, I think, till they cured him of that disease. And of course, he got married, and he had 2 kids, a daughter and a son. The daughter still lives in Germany today. The son lives in Bnei Brak. And again, the son is very religious. The daughter is not. She's the other way around. And my brother died about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. He died he lived in Germany all this time, because to the United States he couldn't come because he had acquired TB and they wouldn't let him in. So he stayed in Germany, and he had an apartment in Israel, and he traveled between Germany and Israel. He lived a little bit here, a little bit there. But about 4 years ago, he fell sick and he had cancer. And the last 6 months before he died, he said he wants to go home and he wants to die in Israel. And that's another 6 months later, he died there. And he's buried at Har HaZayis. And my mother, like I said, she lived here in the United States for about 7, 8 years, or maybe even 9 years in Los Angeles. And then she decided to go to Israel, and she remarried there for a short time, for about 3 or 4 years, and then her second husband, died. So afterwards, she went to a retirement home, and she stayed there for another 10 years. Very religious home, very nice home. I was there a few times. And she felt good about it because it was her environment. It was a very religious environment, and that's what she was all her life. When I came there, I saw that she was happy there, and I was happy about it. So she died last year at 83.
We have just a few more minutes.
Yeah, go ahead.
If there is anything that you think you want to mention, we have about 3 minutes.
Well, I don't know what respect. From the present, you don't need anything. You just need from the past, right?
Whatever you
feel.
Well, the only thing I can say, I was in 1951. I was very happy to hear that I got permission to come to this country. I was very happy to come here, and I'm very happy that I made the decision to come here, and I feel good about it, and I see my kids, thanks God, growing up nicely and having their own kids. My daughter is married happily for 15 years almost now, and she has her own daughter of 13, which is going to be bas mitzvah next week. She has a son of 9 years old. Thanks God, beautiful kids. My son was married, got divorced after a year, and he's single now. And he lives in Los Angeles too, and we are a very close-knit family. We see each other very often, and matter of fact, like I said, we getting together for latkes tonight, Hanukkah. Whatever family there's left from our part, and then from my son-in-law's part, which is also from surviving family. Finkelstein is his name, and they have a large family. They have American side family. They have a European side family, and now his mother, well, her husband died years ago when he was only 37 here in the state, but she remarried, and he has another brother and another sister, and they both married. His brother has a little girl, and we're going to their house tonight. His sister just recently got married, and they're very happy. And I guess that winds up the story. Avig gesund is right.
Thank you very much.
Well, I wouldn't say it was a pleasure. I hope I wouldn't have to tell that story, I hoped there wouldn't be such a story, but since there was such a story, I'm very happy to tell it. So for the future, if somebody wants to look at it.
How do you feel about having told the story now?
Well, I feel now a lot easier than I felt before I started the story. Like I said before, I'll probably have Willie tonight to visit me. But that's part of it, and I guess it's going to stay with me the rest of my life. And I'm glad I told the story, because in the future, if somebody wants to look back, if my kids wants to look back and see how their father did, or what he did, or maybe he's told us most of it, but not all of it, and if there's something they can look back and find it here and they want to know about it, there'll be some evidence. And I'm very happy about it.
Very good. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.